Already, my wife Dolores, who's over there, is saying, fast forward, fast forward, fast forward. You know, I've been sitting there listening to Jack, and I'm wondering, why do you need a keynote speaker with that sort of talent? I mean, he is terrific, and so I'd like to pay another tribute to him. And then I'd like to say, as I look out over this crowd, there are so many of you who could do so much better job if you were here where I am giving this keynote, because I know from your backgrounds that you've paid a price, you've suffered, you worked for equal justice, and the world is better for you. Dolores and I came in tonight, and she said, "Isn't this great? It looks like our crowd." And I'll tell you, it looks like our crowd, and I'm so happy. I'm so happy to have been invited here tonight to talk briefly with you, because some of you heard me before, and you know, I am repetitious. I have a grandson who's 14 years old, Jack Seigenthaler. He's really the third John Seigenthaler. And periodically he calls me to check on my conduct. And so last night, and it's happened before in just the same way, he called and said, "What are you doing tomorrow night?" I told him where we were going to be. Dolores and I are going to be with the Tennessee Alliance for the Progressive Alliance. And he said, "Well, what's the first thing you're going to say to him?" I said, "Well, I'm going to tell him I'm happy to be with him." He said, "Grand, you're almost 85 years old. You're happy to be anywhere." And of course, Jack's right. But I'm particularly happy to be here with all of you. And I want to talk just briefly about what you all know as well, some of you better than I know it. Our country is in trouble. There are many reasons it's in trouble. But our country is primarily in trouble because with each passing day, something happens in Washington or somewhere else in this country that divides us. Divides us now primarily on lines of have and have not. You know, it has become a crisis. And if you listened to the Republican Party debates over the last six months, I'm not here to make a partisan speech, but I will tell you how revolting it was to me to listen in every debate, every one of those candidates talking about how to make the rich richer and the poor poorer. You know, it's likely, it is very likely that some of us will look to Washington and know that Barack and Michelle Obama sleep each night at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. Oh, we've arrived. Well, they are there, but we haven't arrived. And the struggle goes on to try to create some balance, some fairness, some equity in this society. But if you look at it right now, it is as if the poor and the powerless did not have the right to vote. I mean, take us back to the first days of this country when the only voters were white men of wealth. Are we about throw ourselves back to that? I want to spend just a moment, and I don't want to take a great deal of time this evening because there are awards to be made and people who deserve it truly honored. But let me talk a moment about the media, the news media, which has been my life. It's changed dramatically. I spoke with Gene Tassell a little bit about it coming in tonight. And I look back over my years as a reporter, as an editor, as a publisher. And I think of the struggles we confronted. I remember one of my first assignments as a reporter, sitting at the desk. In your mind's eye, go back with me to the newsroom of the Tennessean in 1951. I am a young reporter sitting there and the telephone rings, and a voice on the other side says, "My name is Avon Williams. You don't know me, but I am a lawyer." Was he ever a lawyer? Great lawyer, great United. And he says to me, there's something that's happened in West Tennessee, in Benton County, in Camden. Something has happened there that nobody has paid any attention to. And there was a black man down there who works in a sawmill. And his name is Owen Travis. And Owen Travis has been murdered. He was murdered, Avon says, over an $8 cab bill. And a man named Ernest Cole, a cab driver, killed him, stabbed him, ran his cab over and broke his neck, killed him, threw the knife in the Tennessee River. Owen's employer, it happened in the employer's front yard. His employer, and Avon gives me his name, Ty Dobson. Ty Dobson called the sheriff. The sheriff arrested this man, Ernest Cole. Ernest Cole said, "Yes, I did it in self-defense, threw the knife in the river." That's a Saturday night. Monday morning, the grand jury meets. Ernest Cole's father-in-law is on the grand jury, no true bill. And Avon says, nothing has been done about this. Would your paper have any interest in sending you to Benton County? And the paper did have an interest and did send me. And I met Ty Dobson. I met Ernest Cole. And I met Owen Travis's grieving family. 6 months later, they're still in tears. The result of it was our paper published an expose of what had been done, and that man was convicted and sent to penitentiary. I look back on that early story in my career. I have no idea why in the world Avon Williams picked me to tell me what had happened. I'm so proud the paper sent me there. I look back on my years at the Tennessean, proud of those years during the civil rights movement, when we were in a terrible struggle in this country to figure out right from wrong, justice from injustice, equity from inequity. Look back at that time. Think of the competition that existed in the media in this city at that time between the Banner, the Tennessean. You know, the struggle at that time was real. It gripped us all. This city was on the cutting edge of controversy. We were as racist as any city in South Africa at the height of apartheid. If you were black in those days, anywhere you wanted to go or needed to go, hospital, hotel, motel, restaurant, city park, public water fountain for a drink of water, public restroom to go to the bathroom. There were local ordinances, state statutes, Plessy versus Ferguson, a Supreme Court decision, and those damnable signs that said you may not go, you must go. Think back in your mind's eye on how we were then. I make it a policy not to criticize the media I left. I understand the short staffing. I understand the lack of resources. I understand it's not the same as when I was there, and so I don't criticize. But I will say to you all that we are poor in this country in terms of knowledge because the national media has failed to let us know that we're in this crisis between haves and have-nots, justice and injustice, equity and an absence of equity. My son and I appear from time to time. I wish he were here tonight, because we talk about journalism through 2 generations, and it has been a dramatic change. It's diffused now. And because sometimes online we don't know where to go to get reliable, credible information, we're sort of lost. And so we go to television, and what do we see there? We see the Tea Party. The Tea Party. I mean, what has the Tea Party done? Ask Richard Lugar. Ask Richard Lugar, whose own party deserted him only last week because he was a moderate, because he had some sense of what justice in this country is supposed to mean. And you know, I hear about the Tea Party. Well, you know what they did? I mean, the members in that original Tea Party were patriots. They were against high taxation. This Tea Party supports tax breaks for the rich and the imposition of taxes on the middle class and the poor and the powerless. And we meet here tonight, and most of you have heard me say some of this before, and most of you agree with much of what I'm saying. I looked during the Occupy movement here, and it was, maybe the point was diffused. Maybe it was not one injustice, maybe it was several. Yes, and maybe the homeless came and made that plaza part of their movement. And some would say, well, I mean, it was a fine movement until the homeless came. I mean, what was the movement about but a protest against a government that demonstrates an inability to show its caring concern for those who have not. I'm not going to belabor this. I worry deeply about our country. Yes, as my grandson Jack said, I am almost 85 years old. July, I will be 85. And I think back on the divisions that have separated this country for so long. At the heart of most of it, is a disagreement, a difference, dichotomy, right there between haves and have-nots. So often the have-nots have been identified as minorities, but discrimination in the past, people will tell you, is not the same as discrimination today. Well, discrimination against minorities is as real as it was during the Civil Rights Movement. Now today, the minorities may not just be black. Yes, some of them are certainly black. But Hispanics, Muslims, gays, and lesbians, discrimination is visited on them in this society. They are discriminated against. And those of us who are here, there is a bond between us. I feel it. I know it. In the absence of a media that once focused on that sort of discrimination, we're looking for some place. We're looking for some place on that media spectrum that will help us come together again. And I will tell you, it may be months, years, a decade in the distance before we find that credible source that will continually advise us, expose the wrongs, expose the discrimination, expose the injustice. And I'm frustrated about that. But as I started with a story about my 14-year-old grandson, Jack, let me close with a story about Jack when he was 5 years old. Dolores and I, in those days, would go up to visit in New York, where my son was the weekend anchor, as many of you know, on NBC. And we'd go up, and it was my job, my pleasure, every evening to snuggle in with Jack and read him a few stories. And the year Jack was 5, Thanksgiving, and we went up, and on the night before Thanksgiving, Wednesday, I go up to read to Jack. Knock on the door, my son barges in. Jack, long day today. Tomorrow's Thanksgiving, long day, long night. Grand is going to read you one story tonight. One story. Read him one story, Grand. You got it? Yes, son, I got it. Jack, one story. He's going to read you one story. You got it? Yes, Dad, I got it. I said, okay, Jack, what is it? Well, it's a chapter of Harry Potter. And I breezed through it. And I give him a kiss. I said goodnight. He said, Grand. Oh, he calls me Grand, G-R-A-N-D. I love that. I mean, Dolores thinks he should call her Grander, but... and the fact of the matter, he should. He said, Grand, Dad said you could read me one story, and you have. But you know you could tell me another story. Took her after his grandmother's branch of the family, that smart kid. I said, okay, Jack, I will tell you, but it has to be a quick story, a fast story. Your father will be up here on both of us. What do you want me to tell you? He said, well, I'll tell you. A couple of months ago, Mom and Dad and I were watching television. There was a documentary. And there was a fat, bald-haired actor, and he was acting as if he were you. And he was in Montgomery, Alabama, and he was hurt. And I asked Mom and Dad what that was about, and they told me to ask you, what's that about? And I said, Jack, it'll have to be a quick story, but it's a story with a happy ending. I said, a long time ago, one day in Montgomery, Alabama, there were a group of people called the Freedom Riders. Most of them were black, and they wanted to ride the buses. And there were some mean, angry, hostile white people who did not want them to ride the buses, who would not let them ride the buses, who beat them, put them in the hospital. I tried to help them, and I was from the Justice Department. They beat me, and they put me in the hospital. But I said, Jack, it's a story with a happy ending. They came out of the hospital. I came out of the hospital. And the happy ending is that we all are now able to ride the bus. You know, if you've got a child or a grandchild, 5 years old, just think about the conversations. You look at that innocent, beautiful face, you don't know what wheels are turning inside that little head. And I'm looking at him, I don't know if it's 10 seconds, 30 seconds, a minute. Suddenly he says, Grand, are you black? And you know, my reaction was just as yours. But it took my breath away. And suddenly it dawned on me, this 5-year-old child is colorblind. You know, Jack's now 14. He's still colorblind. You've got children and grandchildren, and they are colorblind. I got home from that trip, and I worried about it. Because before I left that night, I said, you know, Jack, color doesn't really matter, does it? And he said, no, Grand. I wrote him a letter. I wrote him a letter in which I just recited the story I told you, recited what he had said to me. I said then, Jack, I said something to you that's not true. I told you color doesn't matter. Color matters. I said, you're 5, I'm 75. Maybe by the time you're 75, Jack, won't matter anymore. But you should care because it does matter. Discrimination does continue to matter. And those who are minorities suffer from that discrimination on a continuing basis. I think with that child and his generation and their colorblindness, there still is hope. Still is hope. And as long as there are people in this society, as there are in this room tonight, who are right with Jack, we won't have to wait till he's 75. I'm honored to be with you. I thank you all for coming. I thank you for the opportunity to speak to you. This organization, if there is hope anywhere, it's in this room tonight. Thank you all very much.